Hello, friends, and welcome to Figure Study. It is another one of those extremely rare occasions where I'm actually looking at something that's new and not everyone has even seen in stores yet, which is weird, particularly for me because I take forever to look at stuff. But anyway, it's Studio Series Perceptor, and we're starting off in his tank mode because it's clearly the worst one. I mean, I don't hate it. I think it's cute. He has the molded treads on the sides, which regrettably are in red, just like the rest of the leg. They don't really stand out. I feel like it would have been better if they were black, like the hips and feet, like obvious hips and feet, or maybe like gray or something, just something to stand out. Also, there's a big old screw in one of the wheels. I get why they did it that way, though, because this is kind of the throwaway mode, so they did the bare minimum to make it be a thing you can do, and that's it. And that's fine. I do not care at all for the tank mode, so the fact that it's got the least amount of thought put into it, I think is acceptable. I'm not trying to throw hate at anyone who likes the tank mode. That's totally fine. I don't think anyone's bad for liking the tank mode. I just think the tank mode is bad. It's cute for what it is. It's neat that he's got a little bit of a tertiary mode. Like, I can't really call him a triple changer because I know technically he is, but really this is just a microscope that's laying down. All I'm saying is it would have been nice if maybe they painted the treads, which is something I could do myself if I really wanted to, and I don't. But it's a throwaway mode, so let's just move on. Size-wise, the tank is, if we're just looking at the main body mass, is about deluxe size. The orientation is weird. It's definitely wider than it is long, but it is what it is. So yeah, about deluxe size, and it's a really weird looking tank, and let's just move on to the microscope. The transformation into the microscope mode is very, very simple from the tank mode because it's just a matter of reorienting the obvious legs. But I do appreciate some of the little nuances here, like the fact that he's got these joints that are designed to swing the thighs 90 degrees to the left or to the right, and they work in both directions because the treads for the tank are on the insides of the robot calves. So the legs have to swing around basically inverse for the tank mode, and there are little tabs that the tank tread sections can tab onto to make the tank mode relatively solid for what it is. And what we're left with is an obvious robot in a yoga pose pretending to be a microscope. But that's what Perceptor's always been, right? For all the complaining that people do with city formers, which I think I've done myself, I think everyone complains about city formers in a lot of cases. Though Scorponok's pretty legit. But, Metroplex, Fort Max, they're pretty much just big robot does yoga. Perceptor, more or less the same thing. I mean, I do appreciate some of the stuff that they did with this particular figure, but it's very obviously a robot because of like the legs just sticking out and stuff. But I will say, for as much as I'm harping on and will continue to harp on this alt mode because it's not particularly exciting, there is a surprising amount of clever engineering that went into this. Anyway, as for the microscope mode itself, it's a microscope. It's Perceptor. I don't know what else to say. It's a big chunk with little dials at the top and obvious robot legs for a support base, and the little tray for the slides to go on, and microscope scope that moves. This is pretty cool, actually. Just listen to this. It's just got a really nice, satisfyingly clicky ratchet for this specific joint for the microscope piece. This piece is just friction, and it does actually have a little clip thing, like not a big clip, like this little tab thing that kind of keeps this in place so it's not going to flop when the microscope is set up. But I can appreciate that, like that ratchet joint is really nice. I really don't know what else to say about this. It's Perceptor. It's pretty basic, but I feel like they're kind of going for that G1 aesthetic, so that's probably why they kept the molded details to a relative minimum. It's got the dials up on the top, which are just molded from what I can tell. You can't turn them or anything like that, but they are painted. And the lens section, it's the big red tube with the black ends and the little gray for the very end of the lens section, and the dial on the top. And again, the dial does not move. And it seems like you can actually get some light going through the actual lenses, kind of, but you really cannot look through it. It's just a blur. And it's not because I got crappy eyes, it's just you can't see anything through this thing. Like, holding it up to light, you can kind of see light shining through it, but that's about it. So not really a functional microscope, which is fine. Didn't expect it to be. Size-wise, he's just a really weird shape, so he's roughly deluxe size, I guess, but it's just such an odd shape, it's kind of hard to tell. But like mass-wise, it's just kind of spread out. I think overall, it's about the same amount of plastic you'd expect for a deluxe. Going into robot mode, the lower body is pretty much exactly what you expect. Though I will say, it's nice that there are those soft locking points in the hips, both going forward and backward and going in and out, to just kind of help keep the legs in a more solid position in the microscope mode. The upper body, though, has some really interesting stuff going on. What's interesting is the section that holds the microscope together unfurls, and it was holding the microscope assembly in place, but it splits apart and ends up covering up the shoulders, so it bulks out the chest. It has the arms sit at a more proper spot rather than tucked inside the torso like they were for the microscope mode, and it's a really solid way to lock everything together. And what we're left with is a very Perceptor-looking Perceptor. He might be a little bit stocky, I think. It's hard for me to tell because I'm not a Perceptor fan. I don't hate the character or anything like that. I'm nothing Perceptor. I just got this figure because he was at our Target and he was the kind of figure that I was like, oh, if I see him in person, I'll grab him. So I did. So yeah, I don't really have a horse in this race in terms of like how Perceptory this Perceptor figure is, but I feel like based on what I remember, he might seem a little bit stocky. Like the torso, maybe if it was just a little bit longer. Or maybe if the waist section, like the hips, were a little bit narrower. I don't know, just something about his proportions seem a little bit off. There is something about the robot mode that I'm not particularly thrilled with, though, and that is the chasm on his back. I don't mind it in the microscope mode because it's around the back, and the head's kind of filling that void at least a little bit. And really, it's around the back in the robot mode, so it's not that big a deal, but it's just this big old hole right in the middle of his back. I feel like with the way he transforms, maybe there could have been some kind of flip out piece in the back that like would flip out so you could swing the head down and then you flip it back up into place to cover everything up. I feel like I'm harping on this figure way more than I mean to be because he does look good. He is a bit lacking in terms of overall paint. He's got this really nice matte black plastic. I actually really like the look of this for the fists and waist section and the head and the little head platform and stuff. I like that matte black plastic. And then there's this kind of powder blue, I guess, that they used for it, and like red too. And it's all this kind of like nice matte looking plastic. And it looks good, feels good, but there's not a lot of paint on this guy. There's a little bit in the pelvis for some reason. There's what you see in what becomes the tray for the microscope that folds up onto his chest, and that's typical Perceptor. I feel like that's fine. They painted in the dials. I'm sure they painted a lot of stuff on the microscope itself, which I suppose, all things considered, that's probably the most important thing you want to paint on Perceptor, aside from obviously the head and face and chest. So yeah, I feel like they hit the main spots you want to hit, but he does feel a little sparse in the color breakup department. It just seems like maybe he could do with a little bit more color in the legs and the arms. They did paint black on tops of the shoulders, which is nice. Not enough harping about that. Looking at the head, it's a very Perceptor head from what I recall. It's weird. I'm not a Perceptor fan. I know I've said this many times, but the head here, the sculpt, it just seems to be lacking. It looks like Perceptor from what I've seen, but there's not a lot of personality to it. Maybe that works for Perceptor, I don't know, but it just seems a little bit dull. Generic even. Even though it still is obviously Perceptor, just the face is missing something to give it a little bit more personality. Maybe he just needed an expression. I don't know. The actual painting is really nice, though. It uses that nice matte black plastic that I talked about. The silver for the face looks great. The metallic blue eyes also looks really good. And that bit of silver in the head crest, it all does look good. Also, I didn't mention this before, but I do appreciate the fact that they gave him the Autobot logo tampographed on his chest, and it sits at just the right spot that you can see it through the chest window. That's nice. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like maybe he could have done with something else with the face to make it have a little bit more personality. In terms of articulation, the shoulder cannon microscope thing can move up and down on both of its hinges. So you can untab it from that little tab and have it go up and down. You can use the secondary joint that has the ratchet if you want. You can also use that transformation hinge to angle it to the side if you want. The head is on a ball joint, but the up, down, and tilt motion is extremely restricted. Shoulders are on ball joints. They're constructed in a way that you don't get any butterfly motion, but you can go all the way around and out to the side 90 degrees. You get bicep swivels, you get elbows that bend pretty much to 90 degrees. There is no wrist rotation, but due to the transformation, you can move them in and out if you want. You can rotate the waist 360 degrees if you want. The hips can go forward past 90 and back past 90. They do have that soft locking point for the transformation, but you can actually push them past that if you need to. They can go out. It feels like they don't go out very far, but for the transformation, they actually can go to the full 90. The thighs swivel, breaks up the sculpt, but they do swivel. You also have that transformation joint that can go 90 degrees in or out. The knees are actually shockingly good. They bend well past 90, and they probably could bend even further if they either carved out some of the tread section on the back of the calf or shaved down some of the back of the thigh to give it just a little bit more room to bend, but it's a pretty nice knee bend anyway. The toes can point because of the transformation, but they can't go up, and you do actually get up to 90 degrees of ankle tilt. And the ankle tilt kind of softly clicks into place. I'm assuming that's because they don't want the ankles flopping around for either the tank or the microscope mode, even though they're not exactly essential to either one. And then the gun can just peg into his hand, and it looks fine in his hand. It's fine. I think he uses the microscope thing as a cannon, so he probably doesn't necessarily need the little pistol, but he's got it. And the storage for the pistol is pretty much the same as with microscope mode. You can kind of peg it into the shoulders or the sides of the legs, but it looks a little weird. So you're best off either putting it in his hand or pegging it into his back. I will say, despite looking stout, Perceptor's actually relatively tall for a deluxe. He's kind of up there with Spinister, and Spinister was a relatively tall deluxe. Not massive by any means, but definitely overall he just stands taller than I was expecting. And that pretty much does it for Studio Series Perceptor. I actually do like this guy. I mean, for someone who doesn't care about Perceptor at all, I think he's pretty neat. For all my complaining about the lack of molded detail, I do think he has kind of a nice, appreciably clean look that works with the animation aesthetic, because this is part of the Studio Series 86 line, so that's kind of the point. I think the colors are good. The articulation is actually really, really nice on this guy for, he's missing wrist swivels. Well, not missing, but, he doesn't have wrist swivels. The elbows don't bend too far. There's not a whole lot of range on the neck. It's pretty solid articulation. And I have to say, I didn't mention this during the transformation segment because I just forgot, and I wanted to, but the thing that I appreciate the most about this figure of Perceptor is it gives me the feeling of the designers being like, okay, here's this guy who turns into a microscope. There are a lot of Perceptors out there, and most of them turn into microscopes. How do we get from robot to microscope as simply and economically as possible? They did it in a way that really works. Like, there's some interesting transformation tricks in the upper body with how it semi-reshapes itself and recenters the microscope thing. It doesn't involve sliders. It gives you some extra joints in some regards, at least for the scope. But it's incredibly simple in a way where it's like there's nothing being wasted here. That transformation has no frivolous movements at all. It's very boom, 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 done. And it's just very simple, but very effective. And you're left with a very solid looking, aside from the big hole in the back, robot. And like, there's no real kibble on him. Granted, I haven't tried all of the other Perceptors out there, but I feel like this is probably one of the most pure robot turns into microscope transformations that has ever been produced. And I mean that in a good way. It's just very, very streamlined. It's not the mechanical epiphany that Kingdom Cyclonus was, but it's just such a pure, no motion wasted transformation that I cannot help but respect it a lot. Or short version, I think he's neat. I don't care about Perceptor, but the toy is fun. But that's enough about what I think about Perceptor. What do you all think of this guy? Or any of the other Perceptors that are out there? Whatever your thoughts, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. If you like this video or any of the other videos that I've done and you want to support the channel outside of watching the video in the first place, I do have a Patreon. It's a single $1 tier, gets you early access to new videos, access to the occasional behind the scenes posts that I make, and sometimes I'll do like work in progress stuff or customs that I'm working on. And eventually I'm hoping to start doing polls so patrons will be able to weigh in on stuff I might be doing on the channel in the future. With all that out of the way, thank you everybody for watching, and remember, art is more than meets the eye.